Princess Catherine had listened without interrupting, but when the final demand was placed before her, the answer came with stunning certainty. Meghan wanted control of one of Catherine's most valued royal patronages, and expected the Princess of Wales to hand it over quietly. Instead, Catherine pushed the proposal back across the table and gave a refusal so firm that the entire room fell completely silent. What followed was not merely a disagreement over charity. It was a battle over identity, loyalty, and royal authority. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure you subscribe to Royal Zone so you don't miss a single update. Catherine kept her hands still as Meghan explained the proposal. The Royal Children's Health Alliance, a royal patronage, meaning an organization publicly supported by a senior royal, had become one of the princess's most personal responsibilities. She had spent years earning the trust of doctors, volunteers, parents, and children. Now Meghan was asking her to hand over that leadership as part of a return to public charitable work. Meghan leaned forward and argued that her public profile could take the alliance into new countries, bring in more donors, and rebuild faith in what she could still offer. She believed the request made sense, yet beneath that confidence sat pain. The Duchess saw Catherine's answer as a judgment on her place inside the royal family, a message that the door would remain closed. Catherine heard something completely different. She heard years of patient work being reduced to a title that could simply be handed over in one meeting. The princess closed the written proposal, placed it carefully on the table, and said the patronage was not available for any kind of negotiation. Meghan's face tightened. She waited for a softer explanation, but none came. The silence grew deeper, because the demand had never been approved by King Charles, Prince William, or the Alliance's governing council, the group responsible for protecting its mission and leadership. Meghan had gone directly to Catherine, hoping to win her agreement before any officials could stop the plan. The princess knew that such a transfer could blur the line between a working royal representing the crown and a family member operating on their own. Catherine felt the danger immediately. Meghan felt the rejection just as sharply. Neither woman raised her voice. Yet the meeting had already changed the balance between them. But this refusal was only the visible beginning. Behind Meghan's demand stood an earlier promise, a private conversation, and one event that had quietly pushed both women toward this explosive moment. To understand why Catherine's answer carried such force, the story must first turn to the two women sitting across from one another, and everything each one believed she was about to lose. For Catherine, the patronage represented years of patient work, carried out far from the loudest royal headlines. For Meghan, it represented something entirely different, a path back into the public role she believed had been taken from her. Both women entered the dispute, carrying old wounds, private disappointments, and very different ideas about what service meant. Their conflict was not born in a single meeting. It had been waiting beneath the surface, growing stronger every time one woman felt misunderstood by the other. Catherine had built her connection to the Royal Children's Health Alliance slowly, often through private meetings that never reached the front pages. The organization was a royal patronage, meaning a charity publicly supported by a member of the royal family to raise awareness and trust. The princess had met parents facing frightening diagnoses, listened to doctors struggling for resources, and supported programs focused on children's early development. She understood the names, the fears, and the promises behind the title. Meghan saw the same organization through a completely different lens. She had spent months developing an international children's initiative and believed that an established royal connection would give it instant strength. The Duchess wanted credibility, access, and a clear sign that her public service still mattered. She did not believe she was taking Catherine's work. She believed she was expanding it. That difference changed everything. Catherine saw the demand as an attempt to take over years of trust without going through the years of responsibility that created it. Her frustration grew deeper because Meghan seemed to expect her to step aside without any resistance, as though loyalty could simply be transferred with a signature. The princess had faced criticism before, but this cut deeper because vulnerable families had now been pulled into a private struggle over status and belonging. Meghan felt humiliated for an entirely different reason. She believed Catherine was judging every past decision she had ever made, instead of looking at the proposal itself. The refusal sounded final, but to her it also sounded personal. It felt like another verdict from a family she believed had never allowed her to move past old conflicts. Catherine remained seated after the meeting ended. She placed one hand across the patronage folder and stared down at it, saddened that children's work had become part of a royal power battle. The room had emptied, yet the weight of Meghan's demand remained. Meghan returned to her home and immediately called Prince Harry. Her first words were not about donors, medical programs, or international reach. She spoke about Catherine's tone. Harry listened, angry and protective, because he had been the one who encouraged the private approach. He believed one direct conversation between the two women could succeed where formal palace channels had failed. Neither Meghan nor Harry understood the truth. Catherine's refusal had not begun that morning. It had been shaped months earlier by one incident she had never publicly spoken about. The bitterness of the present meeting could not be separated from that earlier moment, when Meghan crossed an invisible line and Catherine decided that silence was no longer enough protection. 3 months before Catherine's refusal, a polished royal charity reception had ended, with a moment that almost no one recognized as dangerous. There was no public argument, no raised voice, and no dramatic exit. Yet one thing said during that evening changed the entire course of events. Meghan spoke as though the patronage's future had already been decided, leaving Catherine to realize that private plans were moving forward without her knowledge. From that moment, the eventual confrontation became almost impossible to avoid. Catherine had hosted the gathering at Windsor Guildhall, welcoming doctors, donors, and families connected to the Royal Children's Health Alliance. The reception was designed to strengthen trust around the patronage, meaning the charity publicly supported by a royal figure. Meghan attended through an invitation from an international partner, but the understanding was clear. She was there as a private guest, not as a representative of the crown. Meghan moved confidently among the senior donors. During one conversation, she described herself as someone who would soon help lead the patronage into its global chapter. The words sounded polished and certain. Yet Catherine had never discussed sharing leadership, transferring authority, or allowing the Duchess to speak for the organization. Catherine heard the remark while speaking with a nearby family. She did not interrupt. She did not embarrass Meghan in front of the room, but the princess felt something shift inside her. Donors were now being encouraged to believe that a change in leadership had already begun, and that belief was being created without her permission. The tension followed them beyond the reception. Catherine approached Meghan privately before the evening ended and asked who had authorized the statement. The Duchess answered that the transition felt like the natural next step. She offered no name, no approval, and no proof. Then she walked away before the princess could challenge the claim. Morning brought something even worse. Palace staff discovered that Meghan's advisors had contacted the charity's office, asking for donor lists, international partnership summaries, and an early plan for how leadership might be transferred. A transition timetable was simply a plan showing how leadership and duties might be moved from one person to another. No such transfer had been approved. One junior official had already shared limited briefing material after being told that Catherine knew about the arrangement. The mistake was recorded in an internal report prepared for the princess, making the source of the information clear. Catherine read the report in silence and immediately ordered every further request to be stopped. She chose not to expose Meghan publicly. Instead, she waited to see whether the Duchess would come to her honestly. Weeks later, Meghan arrived with the formal demand. By then, Catherine knew the proposal had not started with one difficult conversation. It had been developing behind her back. When the two women met again, the language of partnership disappeared, and the question became brutally direct. Who had the right to claim the work, the title, and the royal authority attached to it? The room was small enough that neither woman could hide behind polite ceremony. Catherine sat with the disputed proposal in front of her, while Meghan demanded an explanation for what she called an unnecessarily hostile decision. At first, both women spoke carefully. Then, the old restraint broke apart. The argument moved beyond one patronage and opened up years of built-up resentment. Who had been protected, who had been blamed, and who still had the right to act in the name of the monarchy? Meghan had asked for a second meeting, within hours of receiving the refusal. She insisted that Catherine had rejected the idea before hearing the full international plan. The princess agreed to meet again, but she excluded lawyers, communication teams, and senior household staff. A royal household was the staff structure that managed a senior family member's public duties. Catherine wanted no outside machinery between them. She believed direct honesty might stop the dispute from becoming another family crisis. Meghan started by talking about the children. She described new clinics, global campaigns, and donors who could expand the alliance beyond Britain. Then her voice hardened. The Duchess accused Catherine of protecting territory instead of protecting vulnerable families. Royal service, she argued, was not personal property to be guarded against another woman. Catherine felt the accusation land, but she refused to back down. The princess replied that service required more than just ambition. It required trust, accountability, and consistency. Meghan's advisors had contacted the charity without permission, spoken of a transfer that had never been approved, and created expectations among donors. That was not cooperation. That was pressure. Meghan stood up suddenly and pushed her chair backward. She demanded to know whether Catherine would have reacted the same way if another royal had made the same request. The princess remained seated. Her answer came quietly, but it cut through the room. The answer would be exactly the same for anyone who acted this way. Meghan's anger shifted into something colder. She revealed, through a private recorded conversation from an earlier palace call, that someone close to King Charles had encouraged her to believe the proposal could succeed. The claim suggested that Catherine might not hold the final authority she believed she had. Catherine asked for the person's name. Meghan refused. That refusal changed the meaning of everything. The princess now believed the supposed support was either exaggerated or being used to force her into giving in. Meghan saw the suspicion on Catherine's face and understood that the meeting had reached its breaking point. Meghan moved toward the door, then turned back with one final warning. She said the disagreement would not stay private if palace briefings painted her as demanding or unreasonable. Catherine did not answer, but she understood the threat. The confrontation ended when the door closed behind Meghan, but its most dangerous question remained inside the room. Who had encouraged her to believe Catherine could be pushed aside? Royal power rarely announces itself through shouting. It moves through private approvals, carefully worded instructions, and decisions made before the public even knows a dispute exists. Catherine's refusal appeared personal, but the authority behind it reached far beyond her own feelings toward Meghan. Patronages belong to a system controlled by responsibility, reputation, and the crown itself. As senior figures looked closely at the demand, one truth became impossible to ignore. Meghan had asked for a royal privilege without accepting the royal structure that controlled it. Prince William read the proposal with growing anger. A working royal was a family member carrying out official duties on behalf of the monarch, and the future king believed that transferring the patronage would blur that line beyond repair. Meghan wanted public leadership of a royal-linked organization, while staying free from the rules, scrutiny, and limits that came with official service. To him, that was not a small detail. It threatened the trust behind every appointment made in the Crown's name. William felt something more personal beneath the policy as well. Catherine had been placed under pressure alone because she was known for avoiding public family conflict. The prince believed Meghan's direct approach had relied on that restraint, expecting the princess to choose peace over resistance. He refused to let her silence be mistaken for weakness. King Charles faced a harder choice. He wanted to prevent another serious falling out with Prince Harry. Yet he also understood that royal authority could not bend every time family emotion ran high. A royal patronage was not private property or a symbolic gift. It was a formal public relationship, built on trust between the crown, the organization, and the person appointed to represent it. Charles read the transfer proposal in his private study. The king removed his glasses, placed the pages face down, and stayed silent for several long seconds. Then, he delivered the sentence that ended any hope of easy approval. A royal patronage cannot become a bridge used only in one direction. Palace advisors then traced Meghan's claim of private encouragement through a documented account of an earlier conversation with a long-serving courtier. The official had spoken warmly about future reconciliation and suggested that charitable cooperation might one day be possible. He had never promised control of Catherine's organization, and had no authority to make such a promise anyway. Meghan's team had turned that vague reassurance into something far greater. They treated optimism as approval, and possibility as permission. Charles understood the mistake, but he also understood the danger of rewarding it. The king decided not to overrule Catherine. He confirmed that the patronage would remain under her leadership, and ordered that no royal-linked organization negotiate independently with Meghan's advisors again. William supported the decision. Catherine finally knew the pressure against her had been stopped, but the victory carried a cost. With the king refusing to step in on Meghan's behalf, the dispute stopped being a negotiation and became a judgment, and the Sussex household reacted as though a final door had just been locked. When Harry learned that the king had supported Catherine's refusal, his anger was immediate. To him, the decision proved that reconciliation still came with conditions his family controlled. To William, Harry's reaction confirmed that the request had never really been just about charitable service. What had started between two women now pulled brothers, advisors, and the monarch into the conflict. The patronage remained with Catherine, but the cost of that victory was becoming painfully clear inside both households. Harry received the final decision through a short call from a senior palace secretary. The official explained that Catherine would keep full control of the patronage, and that any future cooperation with Meghan would have to take place through a non-royal partnership. That meant separate names, separate leadership, and no suggestion that the Duchess spoke for the crown. Meghan listened beside him as the message ended. She had hoped the king might soften the refusal or create some kind of shared role. Instead, the decision closed every route she had tried to open. Her disappointment was sharp, but Harry's anger moved faster. Harry called William almost immediately. He accused his brother of hiding personal hostility behind royal procedure and using royal rules to keep Meghan outside the family's public life. The Duke believed the future king had turned one charitable proposal into a test she was never allowed to pass. William refused to accept that accusation. The prince said Meghan could support children, launch campaigns, and raise money for any cause she chose, but she could not demand a royal office while rejecting the duties that came with representing the crown. A royal office was an official role carried out under the monarch's authority, not a title that could be separated from its responsibilities. Harry heard punishment in those words. William heard responsibility. The call ended without any reconciliation. Harry placed his phone on the table and stared at it in disbelief. Meghan stood near the doorway, waiting for reassurance, but his silence told her what no formal message could soften. The decision had become final. Meghan's communications team reacted quickly. They prepared a statement describing her proposal as a good-faith attempt at cooperation, and suggesting that the palace had rejected a genuine chance for unity. Releasing it would expose the private negotiations and force Catherine to defend herself in public. Harry stopped the statement just minutes before it was published. He feared it would destroy what remained of his relationship with Charles and allow palace officials to release documented evidence of the unauthorized donor contacts. Meghan resisted at first, but she finally agreed. Catherine learned through a private briefing that the statement had almost gone out. Relief came first, then fear. The princess understood how close the charity had come to becoming a weapon in another family media war. Yet anger did not become her final answer. As both households prepared for another round of conflict, Catherine stepped away from her advisors and entered a private conversation where duty, pain, and compassion would finally meet. That evening, there were no secretaries, no folders, and no carefully prepared palace language. Catherine and William spoke alone after their children had gone to bed, facing what the dispute had done to their family. The princess had won the decision, yet she felt no triumph. Meghan's demand had crossed a clear boundary. But Catherine understood that a refusal without any compassion could deepen the same cycle of resentment that had already wounded every person involved. Catherine told William she would not reconsider the transfer. The patronage represented years of trust, and giving it up now would betray the staff who had defended its work. It would also reward the unauthorized donor contacts that had placed the charity under pressure. The princess believed responsibility meant protecting people who had never asked to become part of a royal dispute. William agreed with the refusal, but he remained uneasy. The prince feared that offering any kind of alternative would be seen as weakness. Meghan's team had already moved before permission was granted, and he worried another concession would invite another attempt to cross the same boundary. Catherine understood his fear. Yet she also admitted something harder. Meghan's desire to return to meaningful public service was not something to be ashamed of. The Duchess wanted purpose, influence, and proof that her voice still mattered. Catherine could reject the demand without pretending that need was false. The room grew quieter. Catherine reached for William's hand and told him she wanted to protect the patronage without humiliating Meghan. The prince studied her face before answering. He had watched the conflict wound her, and he knew compassion did not erase the wrongdoing. After a long pause, he agreed that the difference mattered. Catherine then proposed a separate international children's initiative. It would carry no royal title, receive no palace control, and gain no automatic access to existing donors. A royal title was an official status granted within the monarchy, while the new project would remain fully independent. Yet one carefully defined campaign could still be supported by both sides. William listened as the idea took shape. The Royal Children's Health Alliance could share research, educational materials, and early development guidance with Meghan's future project. The names, branding, leadership, and money would all remain separate. Catherine would not give up her authority, but she would not block useful work, simply because the relationship had become painful. The prince finally agreed to present the offer personally to Harry. He would make clear that it was not a reversal, and not an apology for the refusal. It was a controlled path toward cooperation, built on boundaries neither household could ignore. Catherine felt no victory. She felt relief. The compromise would not give Meghan the royal patronage she had demanded, but it offered something harder to reject, a future of her own that did not require Catherine to give up hers. By morning, the palace had turned a firm refusal into a carefully defined alternative. But before either side could respond privately, the story escaped into the public world. By sunrise, the private dispute had become a national spectacle. Commentators argued over whether Catherine had defended royal duty or denied Meghan a genuine chance to serve. Supporters on both sides treated the patronage as a symbol of everything that had divided the family. Yet one image captured the public mood more powerfully than any debate. Catherine arriving to meet children connected to the charity, carrying on with the work, while the argument over its ownership dominated every headline. Palace officials moved carefully. They confirmed only that Catherine remained patron of the Royal Children's Health Alliance, and that no transfer had ever been authorized. A patron was the public figure officially linked to a charity, helping it gain trust, attention, and support. The statement protected the princess without directly attacking Meghan, but its careful wording did little to calm the argument. Meghan's representatives responded within hours. They said she had proposed a charitable partnership, would respect the final decision, and would continue developing independent projects. The Duchess hated the suggestion that she had tried to take something belonging to Catherine. She believed the public story had stripped away her plan's real purpose and turned her into an intruder. Catherine felt no comfort in the praise surrounding her. Her supporters called the refusal a defense of royal duty. Meghan's supporters accused the palace of rejecting another chance for reconciliation. The princess watched work involving vulnerable children become a contest between two royal women, and that wounded her more than any personal criticism. The public division became impossible to ignore. The morning edition of the London Herald carried a split image of both women beneath the headline, "Catherine says no." Hours later, a crowd gathered outside Kensington Palace. Some held signs praising the princess for standing firm. Others demanded a fair role for Meghan and accused the monarchy of closing ranks once again. Catherine arrived at a children's therapy center that afternoon, determined not to let the controversy take over the visit. A young girl handed her a handmade card, thanking her for supporting families like hers. The princess lowered her eyes for a moment, steadied herself, and continued speaking with the children. That small pause revealed the very human cost beneath all the headlines. Then the story shifted. A national broadcaster revealed, through a documented palace briefing, that Catherine had offered Meghan a separate non-royal partnership rather than rejecting cooperation entirely. The revelation changed the tone overnight. The refusal no longer looked like a closed door. It looked like a boundary, with another path right beside it. Meghan privately accepted the independent initiative in principle. She understood that continued resistance would make the conflict appear to be driven by status instead of service. When the headlines finally softened, the titles and institutions fell away, and the final meaning of Catherine's refusal rested on the choices made by two women who had reached the edge of another permanent break. Catherine's refusal did not end with Meghan receiving the royal patronage she wanted. It ended with a boundary being drawn and a different path being offered. The princess protected the work entrusted to her while refusing to turn that protection into public punishment. Meghan did not regain a formal position within the monarchy, but she secured an independent opportunity to serve, without pretending the past had been erased. The outcome was imperfect, painful, and final. Yet for once, conflict produced clarity. Instead of another uncontrolled collapse, Catherine formally kept leadership of the Royal Children's Health Alliance, with the full support of Prince William, King Charles, and its governing council. That council was the group responsible for protecting the charity's mission, leadership, and public trust. The princess had not defended a title out of pride. She had defended years of work, relationships, and responsibility that could not be handed over through family pressure. Meghan moved forward with a separate international children's project. It carried no royal status, no palace authority, and no automatic access to the existing patronage's donors. The Duchess finally had the freedom to build something in her own name, but she also had to accept the limits that came with independence. Catherine sent Meghan a direct private message. The princess explained that the refusal had been about trust and accountability, not a desire to stop her from helping children. Meghan replied without challenging the final decision. She admitted that her advisors had moved too quickly, and accepted that approaching donors before receiving permission had damaged the entire proposal. Then came the final conversation. Catherine spoke with Meghan during a brief private call, with no aides or advisors listening. The princess said cooperation could begin only where ownership ended. Silence followed. Then the Duchess answered with 5 words that settled the conflict. "Then we begin separately." Neither woman apologized for every wound between them. Neither pretended the past had disappeared. But both accepted the boundary. Prince Harry withdrew his accusation that William had personally engineered the rejection. The Duke acknowledged, through a recorded family call, that the decision had wider support. In return, the future king agreed that palace communications would not attack Meghan over the failed demand. Charles approved one future research-sharing campaign between the two charities. The king made certain that neither woman would give up authority or claim control over the other's work. Catherine's refusal proved that compassion did not require giving in. Meghan's demand failed, but that failure forced her to create something of her own. The princess emerged not as a rival guarding status, but as a future queen capable of saying no without turning disagreement into cruelty. The monarchy survived by choosing clear boundaries over private promises. Catherine kept the patronage. Meghan accepted an independent role. The family avoided another permanent and irreversible rupture. In the end, Catherine did not give up her patronage. Meghan did not return through a borrowed royal role. And the crown delivered its clearest verdict. Service could be shared, but responsibility could never be demanded. Thanks for watching Royal Zone. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to Royal Zone so you never miss an update. And we will see you in the next one.